and welcome to the latest edition of Paul Walsh Talks Advocacy and Influence. Today I am delighted to be joined by Jasper Nagtegaal, an entrepreneur and public affairs professional. Let's start with a quick introduction. Jasper, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me, first of all. And it's great to be in this podcast today. I'm one of the managing partners at Publyon, consultancy in Brussels. We're focusing specifically on transport and energy-related files, also sustainability and tech. And I'm really passionate about this because we can talk today about business and public affairs as well, right? So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
Now, your profile seems really interesting because, I mean, while you started in public affairs, you also have started your own company, which is completely outside of public affairs. It's in logistics. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I've been in public affairs since 2010 in the Port of Rotterdam area. And those days, people were talking a lot about innovation in business. Actually, the business I started is based on a certain regulation because the VGM got introduced. It's a verified cross mass for shipping industry. Where you really had to weigh the weight of a container in order to stabilize the ship. I think we all heard about containers falling off of ships, right? We have this famous story in the Netherlands of Nike shoes at the beach because they fell out of containers. And we decided, okay, if we can support the sector in getting more grip on this, right, and not burden them too much, let's build a database with relevant data of containers. And so we did, which was quite a challenging thing. But we managed to capture like 99% of all container weights in a database. So that's basically how it all started.
Okay, so you gather all of that data, and then is it a service that you provide to container shipping companies?
Yeah, actually, we have a data cooperation with one of the largest companies, container terminals in the Rotterdam area. That's how we got all the information. And indeed, we analyzed it, we enriched the data, and now we feed it back to the logistics chain.
And part of it is about making these companies compliant with our regulation.
Yeah, exactly. But that's always a challenging question, right? It's about demand and supply. Also in data, what we figured out is that the willingness to pay for data is still an issue in logistics. But indeed, it really could help them because if there are any checks or the authorities will check in or do kind of controls, then they would indeed comply to this regulation. It's not really a regulation, but more like a guideline how to work with weights. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
To comply. Yeah.
And so is it linked to, let's say, best practices within this sector?
Yeah, you could say so, but I think that people who are familiar with supply chain know how people deal with each other. They're quite familiar. They try to help each other out. So if they miss anything on data or these kind of things, they always find a way to make it work. Take a picture of the back of a container, share it with each other. But we just found it's not that efficient. Yeah, our statement is always garbage in, garbage out, right? With data. So at the moment, if you can insert clean data in the supply chain, then throughout the whole chain, you will keep using this clean data. That's basically what we try to do here.
You started in public affairs, I believe, at the port of Rotterdam. Then you moved to develop this company, but then you've also sort of been brought back into public affairs again through Publyon. Is it important for you to have this balance, entrepreneurship on the one hand, public affairs on the other? Or is this something that's sort of developed organically within your career?
Definitely. I've always had a passion for this intersection of public and private sectors. So obviously I have a background in port and transport and logistics, but what I've seen evolve over the years, and that's also what I've heard back from previous episodes you did, is that the profession of public affairs has been developed a lot, right, over the years. And I feel that private companies cannot do without good lawmaking or legislation anymore, and specifically the current circumstances with geopolitical turbulence. What I always try to do, because we're both part of this Brussels bubble, so to say, but I always try to keep this outsider perspective also when I talk to companies, because for them it's still a black box. For us it's a given. We always break down what's coming up, whether it's the Green Deal, Fit for 55, all this legislative umbrellas over the years. But for them sometimes they just don't know where to start, and they just look at it with the entrepreneurial mindset. And that's what I always try to do, try to put myself in their shoes.
Do you encourage them to try and actually influence legislation, or is it more a case of being aware of it so that they can be ready and kind of be compliant?
Yeah, I think both, actually. Yeah. When you start building public affairs strategies with companies, it starts with understanding what the policy is about, how does lawmaking work. But step by step and gradually you feel, okay, you need to stay in control, mitigate risk and opportunities, and then you look at, okay, can I be part of this lawmaking to even make it better, right? Regulation that works, basically. Yeah, legislation.
So let's say with this entrepreneurial aspect to your makeup, what are you able to bring to public affairs? Let's say at Publyon, are you introducing any innovations, maybe around data or about how to measure public affairs? Or do you see opportunities for these within public affairs?
I definitely see opportunities because having worked in both fields, actually, and still being in both fields, I see that it's not unwillingness, but there's sometimes people coming from a business and a policymaker don't seem to understand each other, right? So it's really about building dialogues, usually fact-based, because what you usually see is in thought leadership and companies bringing forward their positions is sometimes just too general, I would say, the high over and not specific, not tangible. And I think if there's one thing I learned from the Brussels bubble is to try to make it as concrete as possible, use language that resonates with policymakers as well and vice versa. And I think with the experience I gathered throughout running a business, I feel how to translate this into policy messaging as well.
Are you also suggesting there that maybe companies have been playing it too safe in their messaging to the extent that their messages are not going to land at all?
Well, a lot has happened over the past mandate as well with the Green Deal. There's a lot of sectors and companies that have never been involved in policy making at all, simply because they only had to comply with certain regulations. Well, that was a lawmaking or a compliance kind of thing that corporate lawyers took care of. But now, all of a sudden, they get confronted with huge goals, objectives, right? Carbon neutrality by 2050. Huge challenges, and now all of a sudden a lot of companies wake up and feel like, hey, I need to do something about it, and instead of pushing away, which is already a bridge too far, they need to be part of the solution. Yeah, and it requires a different mindset, a different approach to tackle all those challenges.
I think what you said is you said something there that's quite interesting, which indicated that for many companies, the kind of public affairs dimension was really linked to, let's say, their general counsel or their legal department. And that's the lens through which they looked at political developments which might have an impact on their company. And maybe what's needed is this shift where really companies above a certain size need another position, a public affairs position, which is looking at these issues and strategy through a very different lens.
Definitely, yeah. But you've seen the changing in the boardroom as well, right? So I think usually the board of a company was always super busy with revenue, with shareholder expectations, growing the business. And now all of a sudden, this is also to do with geopolitical turbulence. Legislation just entered the boardroom, right? It's a crucial part now of your license to operate, because how can a business survive if it doesn't comply or adapt to what's coming from the EU?
Tell me a bit more about that. I mean, what does the business mindset actually bring?
Well, if you break it down into specifically the Brussels mindset, I think it needs to have a realistic approach, right? So we ask a lot of companies these days. We ask investments to sustain and digitalize. It sometimes feels like you ask a business to run a marathon and you put another one or two on top. So it's also about giving them time to adapt in the right pace, because yes, you can apply certain rules and obligations, but if you do it that quick and you don't give them the time to implement, then you just kill the entire business. So it's on the one hand being the solution partner, demonstrating the willingness, and there we've seen already a shift over the past 5 years, but it's also about competitiveness. It's about employment. Business leaders need to think about a lot of things, like keeping people to work. There's a lot of elements that come into play that not necessarily are at the table when you negotiate about a certain legislation.
So the challenge then for a public affairs agency like yours is to have a really strong understanding of the challenges that your clients are facing, and then understand how you can translate that in a way that the people that you're speaking to in Brussels really get that. And you seem to be suggesting that often they don't.
Yeah, well, definitely. For example, if you look at reporting obligations that came out recently, look at CSRD, CSDDD. Yeah, you can easily say, okay, these apply to bigger companies, corporates, but it all trickles down to the SMEs underneath, right? And they don't have the resources to collect data or to hire people to support them. And those are sometimes elements that are overseen by policymaker when actually putting this legislation together. So it requires a realistic view on, okay, what does it mean for a complete sector or supply chain?
On that second take, if we take an entrepreneur or a corporate leader who is invested in an association, who has financially invested in an association by paying their membership fee, how do they know if the association is actually working in an accountable way? Given that, let's say, the success metrics are much more difficult to measure than a lot of corporate leaders would be used to.
First of all, I feel it starts with building trust, right? So if you help running an association, they need to be convinced, or you need to be convinced that this partnership, working together with us being the expert and positioning them to build this trusted dialogue, really works out. And what we always try to do is to say, okay, what are our objectives? What are our goals? What do we want to work to? And of course, you can measure in how many meetings did you set up, right? How many amendments did you manage to get in? But as well, the reality is that it doesn't work like that. It's not a metric of success. Although I think if you build an online presence and you try to convey your messages, you really try to build this fact-based dialogue, you stick with it. Yeah, you will see that your footprint will increase in Brussels and your authority will raise, and then you get recognized and get a seat at the table and being a partner in this whole process. So it's really gradually building trust and building it further. And yes, if you compare then to running a business, that's completely different, right? You set objectives, you sell products maybe, and you just look at your cost and your income and your revenue, and that's your result, and that's the success basically you can demonstrate. Yeah, that's completely different when it's about association management, where you really need to take a lot of different things into account. What I also find interesting is that you see that these big companies sometimes and associations really need to cooperate, right, on creating the right legislative field or landscape. But on the other end, they're their biggest competitors sometimes. So that feels super counterintuitive to be in meetings with each other, trying to shape legislation while you're also competing with each other, right? So that's also sometimes a difficult point to tackle. And then it could be really good that you have public affairs professionals or heads of public affairs that maybe can distance themselves a bit from the emotion of driving a business and being competitive and really try to shape this together, right? And see the added value of cooperating on certain files.
Moving to a different topic. How important do you think digital advocacy is today? Is it a fad, or is it something that can in very concrete ways influence policy?
Yeah, I think we've seen this evolve over the years a lot, right? If you look at everything that's going on now with social media, fake news that you need to move away from. I already touched a bit on building this fact-based dialogue, but you also see that that policymakers, for example, in the European Parliament get younger, which means that they use different kind of means and social media, right? So I think there are now different platforms to convey messages, which we also use and advise to our clients to use. But I think it's super important because policymakers get bombarded with a lot of requests with manifestos and policy papers. So to really stand out, it's about being to the point, tangible, and also visualize sometimes what you try to convey. And that's what we try to really work hard on every day. Yeah.
Much more, but everybody's focused on getting the issue into a position paper.
Yeah, but do people actually read these manifestos, right? I think you circulate them, and where do they end up? In a drawer somewhere?
I mean, if you're an MEP and you're receiving a few hundred of these, I would imagine that it's difficult to read all of them.
Yeah, exactly. So then you really need to see, okay, how can you stand out, right? And I feel the associations we support sometimes deal with complex processes and supply chains. So then you need to try to capture it, because most of the people you talk to, apart from the commission, are not that experienced and educated. So my point that I always try to make is about convincing people. It also always starts with educating them about what it's about, why it's so crucial, why it's a crucial part of economy, why it's vital, because that should be the starting point and not the legislation itself.
Is education the right word here, or is persuasion a better word?
I would argue that persuasion comes after education, actually. So it starts with a mutual understanding. What do we talk about here? And what we always try to do is set up work visits, right? To see the actual plant where certain processes take place. And that's sometimes hard because it's hard to get the policymakers out of the EU bubble. But I think if once they've seen, they're convinced that we should do it differently.
Okay, very good. So entrepreneurship, public affairs, we haven't discussed it in this podcast, but also running marathons. What else would you like to achieve? Maybe not in life, but in your career?
I'm quite worried. I don't know what about you. I'm quite worried about what currently is going on in the world, right? Geopolitical instability, and I think we need to cherish what we have in Brussels with dedicated people that are super aware about their responsibilities. If it's from a trainee in Brussels to someone in a DG, head of unit for DG Move, for example, I think everyone is super aware of what is at stake. And to contribute to this, safeguarding the EU economy, making it future-proof, and remaining our sustainability goals, that's what I wake up for every day to contribute to. And that's something we need to do together. And if I can just add a little bit to this by making people understand each other, because that's in the essence, I feel, what communication is about and what policy making is about. We just need to understand where we're coming from and how we do this together. Yeah, I think there's a lot of steps I still want to achieve there.
So there's kind of an extra, let's say, element now, or the element of, let's say, the mission of people who work in public affairs can become more important, because just that small link between some companies and politicians is so important in that kind of general cohesion, which is threatened now due to geopolitical developments.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's why I feel that public affairs professionals or lobbyists really play a positive role here, right? Because we're basically the oil in the clockwork, so to say. So what we try to do is gather and convey the messages in a positive way. Because the only thing we're not pushing back, but we try to make it work together. Yeah, these days with social media, I think there should be a way, right, to convey messages in a better way. And apart from all the negative news, maybe share some positive and great examples of how we work together and work towards solutions.
I mean, you mentioned black box. Another term that you hear a lot about the EU is faceless bureaucrats. There's a lack of personalities, big personalities to get. And maybe that's an element of its value, in a sense, that it's a lot of people working very seriously behind the scenes. But it seems deficient in these type of personalities that could really communicate its value.
I agree. Well, I think if you look at von der Leyen, I think she managed to create a face, right? The only thing, and that for me, it's also a bit ambiguous. I'm a liberal by heart. She's not elected, right? So she's put there because of some leaders chose her. So if you really take this further, then you would require a different kind of setup, although I also believe in the autonomy of member states itself. So it's a complex puzzle, but I agree with you. It would be great to have some faces, and that's what you need to give US politics, that some famous people or actors or other people sometimes stand up and also spread these messages. So it maybe could help, right? If there's some popular EU faces that stand up and maybe try to spread these messages.
What comes across to me in conversations like this, and it's really coming home to me in this conversation, is there's so much more work to do in public affairs. On the professional side, how we kind of build up the profession as something that really should be required by companies above a certain size, but also then something that I hadn't really reflected on too much until now is this role that we can play when it comes to the EU, how to communicate that, how to play a role. Because really, I think other parts of the world are making the EU look very good now. And I think sometimes cynicism creeps in where we don't really cherish what we have enough and kind of recognize that we're a part of something that I would say overall is a net positive, has had a very, very positive impact on European society.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think we're more on the front runner side, right? If you look at this clock. At Publyon, we also started making some super easy explaining videos, what's public affairs about and how can you build your influence. But I think there's still a lot of companies and organizations questioning ourselves, why would I invest in public affairs, right? And that brings us back to where we started this discussion, that they feel like, I will deal with legislation once finalized and it's coming my way, I need to comply. But we both know it's too late, right? Because then you cannot change certain things anymore or objectives in that they're stemming from this legislation. So, the earlier you engage, the better. But it's not what people always realize.
Great. Jasper, lots more work to do. Keep it up. And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, nice for having me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.